So I'm not sure if this counts, but I was in 8th grade in 1985 and my father received a transfer overseas, moving us to Pakistan. All my classmates at my middle school kept making random jokes that I was going to get shot and killed. Just a few weeks earlier, actually, 4 Americans were killed in Karachi, Pakistan. I moved to Pakistan and things went pretty smoothly. Then, one day when I was a junior in high school, my older brother, who graduated high school in 1993 and was currently visiting, woke me up at about 4 a.m. and told me to go up to the multi-system, where we had two TVs, an NTSC that played US movies and was hooked up to our Armed Forces radio and television service, and a smaller multi-system TV that we used to watch news and stuff. Anyways, blurry eyes, I was not really understanding what I was seeing and asked him what I was looking at. "Dude, that's our fucking school," was his response. Then it hit me. We're looking at our old house on the corner of Pierce and West Polk Avenue in Littleton, Colorado, with a police sniper on the roof looking towards North Columbine High School on a British news station via satellite in Islamabad, Pakistan. Several of my classmates from Leawood Elementary and Ken Carroll Middle School were shot, and at least one kid that had warned me that I was going to be killed in Pakistan was dead. If it hadn't been for my dad, I might have been one of those victims. I was in 8th grade at this time. In a classroom pretty close to ours, one kid had brought a gun with him to school. Thinking it was a replica, he was playing around with it and quietly showing it off to his friends in the middle of the class. Apparently, the professor was preparing an experiment for their chemistry class and wasn't supervising them very closely. As the teacher went back to the room, the boy was pretty hysterical and grabbed the gun from his friend. In that process, he accidentally pulled the trigger. The gun went off and the bullet hit the flask the teacher was holding and went into his arm. We just heard the bullet, exploding glass, and screams of agony. Our teacher told us to be quiet and went outside the room to check what happened in the chemistry class. We really were silent, dead silent, which is pretty surprising for a class full of 14-year-olds. We were all in fear about what just happened and what might happen next. We had to stay in the classroom, but everyone was gathering around the windows when the ambulance and two police cars approached. The teacher had 2 surgeries and suffered from chemical burns. The boy got suspended. I never heard of him again. Fortunately, nobody lost their life, but I think a suspension was pretty tame of a punishment for that kid. So this wasn't a shooting as in Columbine. I was in 8th grade. A 7th grader brought a gun to school. He was playing with it in music class while they were watching a Disney movie, the songs from which they would be singing later that year at a recital. I can't remember what it was, I think maybe Aladdin? Anyways, I guess he was fiddling with it and dropped it on his desk. It went off and struck and killed the little boy sitting in front of him. So the school went on complete lockdown. I, as I said, was in 8th grade and was in algebra on the other side of the school, so no one on that side knew what the hell was going on, because we didn't hear any gun go off. In hindsight, it was awful, because we used the sudden absence of our teacher to fuck around. I know we had no way of knowing that this little boy just died and we were there throwing around footballs and shit to each other. So, for a couple of hours, we're just in this room. Our teacher, who was normally this super chill, mild-mannered guy, had been all, "No one leaves this damn room or else there will be hell to pay," something like that. So we didn't. I don't think we were even allowed to use the bathroom. We all found out after the fact that there was this one kid who was coming back from the dentist appointment, and I don't envy him the sight of all the police, the tape, the ambulance, and I'm sure the palpable horror going on, but he was not allowed into the school. Anyways, the families of the shooter and the victim were close, and I believe were even neighbors. A lot of us went to his funeral. He was so tiny, it was just heartbreaking. Since this happened 20 years ago, I did some Googling, and I was wrong. The shooter did not bring the gun, but the gun was passed away to him in class by a student who brought it. It was also the first incident of a shooting in a school in this particular city. I was in my American history class at the time when the shooting happened. The shooting took place in the main office of my school, and my class was to the far left of the school. It was during lunch hour, but my class had recently came back from lunch. At the time of the shooting, I had earbuds in because we were working on a project in the class. My friend bumped me and told me that we were in a code red and that we had to do some procedural stuff. Lights off, no one inside of the window or the door, everyone sitting on the ground, no talking, no cell phones, etc. The no talking rule always got broken because people wanted to hear what other people had to think what was going on. The year of the shooting, I was a freshman. The shooter was a senior and had been suspended due to doing donuts in the parking lot. He left the school, did some K2, police report said, came back with his father's loaded handgun and shot the vice principal and the principal. The principal survived, but the vice principal sadly did not. The student left the building and drove somewhere, parked, and shot himself in the head. Sad thing was that the vice principal had a son that taught at our school. I didn't have him as a teacher, but he took a few weeks off after the shooting, understandably. It's funny to think that all the while this happened, I was working on my American history project, not knowing what was going on until someone actually had to announce over the intercom what had happened. After a couple hours of being in code red, police started to escort classrooms outside of the building. It was a rough time after that. When I was in 5th grade, a guy across the street went crazy and got into this whole shootout with the police. A bunch of his bullets actually went inside my school. We all had to hide under our desks while the standoff took place. No one was injured, thankfully, but the shooter was shot dead by police shortly after. It was pretty scary when you're only 10 years old and bullets are coming in through the windows, but it was a pretty crazy time in the 80s and stuff like that happened a lot in my city. My class was lucky and didn't have any bullets flying through their windows, but some other classes weren't so lucky. The standoff overall lasted about 7 hours, with that being the grand finale. Guns were normal in school growing up at that time period. I got solicited my first pistol in 8th grade for just $100. In high school, nearly everyone had a gun in their car for some reason or another. Never had any shootings though. I don't really know if this even qualifies, since I wasn't directly involved in this, but I was at school when it happened, so there's that. When I was a junior in 1998, I was in an office applications class when the school went on lockdown. We didn't know at first what had really happened. I remember someone coming to the door and motioning for the teacher to come speak with him. After a few moments of hushed discussion, the man left and my teacher shut and locked the door. She went to the front of the class and, in a very somber voice, explained to us that we were going to be staying in class until the end of the day, and maybe even longer, if the police wanted us to stay put. We asked her what was going on, and she just choked up and made a weird sound, kind of like a cross between a sob and a cough. She told us with tear in her eyes that a boy named Nick Creason had been shot outside, and that it didn't look like he was going to make it. A few of the girls in the back began gasping, and some of them even began crying. One of their friends was a girl named Tonya, who was Nick's girlfriend at the time. They all knew each other. Apparently, Nick had had a falling out with the other boy, Jacob Davis, over Tonya's affections. Jacob had gotten so angry that she was seeing the other guy after dumping him, so he confronted him about it in the parking lot. This resulted in him being shot in the head with his rifle. Nick died at the hospital. 3 lives were ruined that day. Nick's, which was lost forever, Tonya's, she was never the same after that, and Jacob's, he's serving life in prison now, not to mention the families of all 3 of them. All of that happened over a girl. Even when I was a know-nothing kind of a girl in high school, I knew that no boyfriend or girlfriend was worth committing murder over. But I've never had to walk in anyone else's shoes, so I don't know what else goes on in someone else's mind when they're that angry. I just wish it hadn't happened. It was right after Columbine, and it put our sleepy town on the map and in the public eye. It's selfish and strange for me, but I'm glad I don't personally know any of the people involved. It was easier to deal with it by distancing myself. It made it just seem less real. I think it's a kind of coping mechanism a lot of survivors use after school shootings. This isn't really a survivor story, but once in middle school I noticed this kid sitting in the lunchroom alone by himself crying. Apparently some bullies had made fun of him and stolen his lunch. I don't know why I did it, but completely out of character I sat next to him and tried to make him feel better. I shared my lunch with him and we talked for a bit. He was extremely hateful and said things like, "I'll get them, I swear." I convinced him that the best revenge one can get is to be successful in life on their own. When lunch ended, he thanked me and I gave him my number. Anyways, later on, he sent me a text a week later telling me that his family was about to move. He said something like, "Hey, so alone, 34. I just wanted to say thanks for how you talked to me that day. I was so angry I felt like murdering those jerks. My dad had a loaded gun and it was all I was thinking about. But thank you, nevertheless, for helping me realize how wrong it was to think that way. My family is going to be moving in a couple days to Michigan, so I just wanted to say goodbye." I doubt he was actually going to shoot anyone, but it was cool that I might have stopped a school shooting from happening. I attend UCSB, where the shooting in Isla Vista happened in May 2015. I wasn't directly involved in the line of fire, so to speak, but I was an elected student government member for the school and was very involved in the aftermath. The night it happened, I was at the theater with my friends. We got some texts letting us know that there had been shots fired on one of the business road in IV. We were nervous, but not scared at this point. It's not uncommon for a shot or a firework to go off occasionally, but as the texts kept coming in, we realized that this wasn't typical. At the theater, there was a huge line outside waiting to go in, and everyone was standing on the street. My fear was that somebody was on a drive-by rampage, and we looked like a good target. I asked the manager to move everyone inside, and they did a few minutes later. My friends and I were convinced something was terribly wrong, so we ended up leaving. I drove us back to the school, and on the way we stopped at the UCPD station. There was a guy out front with blood on his shirt, but no one would give us information. We went to the student government building and locked ourselves in. We started writing statements for release to the school while we turned on any news or radio stations that were reporting that we could find online. At about 4 a.m., we drove to the sheriff's station for the press briefing when we realized just how many people were dead. I remember watching the shooter's YouTube video there and feeling so sick to my stomach. I and my friend couldn't get home because of the streets being taped off, so we stayed with the other friend that night. They slept while I started planning for the candlelight vigil the next day. I think I got 2 hours of sleep that night. It's funny what becomes important when you go into shock. I remember being so angry that my mom called me in the morning before my alarm went off. The next morning, we collaborated with other students and staff to get the vigil set up. That day was a blur and everything felt so surreal. I didn't go home until right before the vigil to shower and change and put on the news. That was the first time I heard the media comparing our shooter to the Sandy Hook shooter, and it felt like we were in a bubble and I hadn't even made the connection that we would be used as a next crusade for gun violence. I realized I didn't have anything black to wear to the vigil, so it was the first time I ended up crying. The vigil was amazing and beautiful and truly the real light in the darkness. Numbers for attendance were estimated at 5,000 people. I handled a lot of student media interactions, which was pretty infuriating. The media was really quite heartless and didn't care about trying to interrupt people praying or crying at the memorial sites in IV. It really broke my heart. They all just wanted a photo or a quote, and they were often really rude to students. I took over social media for all of the events that continued throughout the week and also helped plan the formal memorial service that 20,000 people attended. That was hard too because our seats were right behind the seats of the victims' families. I haven't talked about this in a long time. I found it really hard to grieve and constantly worked to keep myself busy. I remember getting really angry at articles people threw out, especially from high school friends who were trying to offer the solution, whatever that might be, that said empathy was the answer. I refuse to believe that giving this murdering asshole a hug would have saved my neighbors, and frankly, it's an offensive notion. He was mentally unwell. I feel like this is a really disjointed response, and I'm actually shaking while writing this. So this is a story from my wife. She was a senior at St. Pugh's High School in Ottawa. It was a Catholic school with nuns and brothers for teachers. A guy she knew walked in with a shotgun right in front of the class as students were just getting in. Then he started shooting. My wife was about 4 from the front, and everyone scrambled and screamed to get to the back. He managed to shoot 5 or 6 of the people in the front. One guy was shot in the face and died. She said that there was blood everywhere. The teacher was a male brother and moved to get in the way to save the students. She said it all happened so fast. Then the shooter moved out of the class away from the teacher and blew his own head off in the hallway. She said that when he died, they left the classroom and had to step over his body. She slipped on one of the pieces of the man's brain and fell right into the bloody puddle that had collected. She didn't like to talk about it much, but when she was watching the news about Columbine a few years ago, she opened up to me. The guy who got shot in the face at the front of the room was the only one who died. Everyone else was more or less wounded pretty badly, but ultimately lived. One girl lost her eye, I think. She says the guy was a real loner and raped and killed a girl he liked right before the shooting. Some of the other guys had teased him pretty hard. You never know what someone is truly capable of. So we were in 8th grade, and a senior had brought his father's gun to school. He passed a group of my classmates who were discharged early from a lesson and were standing next to the classroom. He boasted that he had a real gun. Some of the boys didn't believe him, insulted him, so he pointed and fired. The first shot entered one of the classmates' head and killed him on the spot. My whole class went to the funeral. The second became wedged in another classmate's head. This boy didn't die, but never made a full recovery. He never returned to school, and we lost contact with him over the years. I remember how the teacher cautioned his close friends who were allowed to visit him that he was acting weird, and not to be put back by his behavior. As the senior boy started shooting, the rest of my classmates ran away down the staircase and a bullet grazed an ear of one of the boys. He returned to school soon afterwards. I think he was a bit shocked for quite some time. It's completely understandable. The shooter was able to escape the premises, but was eventually apprehended after he went back to his own house. Pretty stupid move in my opinion. I don't really know what happened to him afterwards, but I think it's safe to assume that he'll be spending a very long time behind bars. Hey guys, it's Gotay here. I want to thank you all so much for listening to this video. School shootings are pretty touchy and have a soft place in a lot of people's hearts, and it's terrifying to know that somewhere that you go to learn can turn into a war zone. But if any of you have any stories you would like me to share, please send me them via my personal email linked in the description below, and I'll be sure to include it in the next storytelling montage. But thank you guys so much for watching. Stay safe out there. This whole madness is almost over. We just gotta keep strong. Love you guys, and I will see you mates in the next episode.